Blast from the Grassroots, connecting people and sharing ideas. Hello and welcome back to Duran ASEAN. You're with Gauri.
Welcome back to our Blast from Grassroots session. This is Grace.
And you're listening to Duran ASEAN, of course, the voice of discovery and sharing. And today I have two guests with me in their studio, Shar and Liana, who are young women activists, and they are here to share about their experience in the recent Beijing 20 Plus that took place. Let's say hello to them first.
Good morning.
Hello.
Morning.
Hi. How are you guys doing?
Doing well.
I'm doing good. Thanks for having us, Gary.
Thank you for
No
coming.
problem. So you guys were recently, you guys attended the conference on the Beijing 20 Plus.
Yeah.
And maybe a little introduction to what Beijing 20 Plus is to for all our listeners.
Sure, I could try that. My name is Liana.
Yeah.
And me and Shara recently there at the review. The review of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action is basically a review of an event that took place about in 1995.
Yep. 1995.
Where a whole, I think, 189 governments got together and produced a platform for change. What that basically is a framework. All these countries have agreed to have made a commitment to equality. But when one country makes that commitment, another country makes a commitment, there's a gap. So this framework kind of synchronizes things for everybody.
Okay. Yeah.
So there's 12 critical areas in there. So the whole document encompasses things like women in the environment, women in poverty, women in economy,
Yep.
violence against women, the
yeah.
girl-child rights, and there's 12 critical areas of concern. And I think over the past 20 years, the governments have taken that platform and interpreted it into their own laws for change.
Okay.
The laws and policies. So now it's 20 years after that, after 1995. So it's the anniversary of that platform for action. So this review is to look at what has been achieved, but also what gaps still exist, and also what new challenges exist now. You know, the world's a different place than it was in 1995.
Yeah.
So yeah, this conference was both a chance for the governments and states to come together and the civil society organizations to come together to review their work and what's been achieved.
If I could really sum that up, though, I think it would just basically mean that all these governments promised change, and this document tells you the kind of promises you could make. And then every 5 years they review and say, have you been keeping up to your word?
Right.
How's your promise doing?
Yeah.
Of course. So what initiated you to be the activist, and how long have you been involved in this?
Well, I think for me, I've always been really interested in women's rights for as long as I've been alive. But mostly, I think I started learning more about feminism and women's human rights in university, which was maybe 5-6 years ago. But in terms of being more active, I was part of a workshop last year that dealt with advocacy, and it was held in Malaysia, and it dealt with young women and trans women issues. So that really opened my eyes as to what could be done here.
I see.
Yeah. So it's been about a year.
And Shara wrote me into another workshop as well. I was a rapporteur for a workshop that was educating young women as gender equality advocates.
Yeah.
And as rapporteur, I had to produce a report, and I just got it a bit more firsthand into the process locally. I was already quite interested in this online. So.
And how did you guys get roped into this?
It's part of a larger program called Young Women Making Change. That's regional. So it's put
By
together.
IRA.
Yeah, put together by IRA Asia Pacific. So IRA is International Women's Rights Action Watch. So the whole program is funded by UN Women. So it's and they've got a gender equality fund, I think.
Yes.
Fund for gender equality. So they've had the program for nearly 2.5 years now, I think. And so that was the first workshop that I was a part of, and the workshop that Lee was a part of was also part of that. So they have really been working quite tirelessly to get more young women involved to become advocates for gender equality. So we're not the only country that's part of that program. The other 3 countries are Vietnam, Laos, and Timor-Leste.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think what's important to note is that all these programs took place among youths, and mostly by invitation, and just kind of talking about our experiences in a safe space. And what we attended, this platform review, was a very different level. It's like grassroots, all the way to the top.
Yeah.
So that was very
IRA
eye-opening.
initially worked with CRIS, which is Knowledge and Rights for Young People Through Safer Spaces. So that's a local, they call themselves, I forget what they call, but they're like catalyst kind of incubator type of organization
Yeah.
where they're like really push you, but then you kind of have to go forward and do your own thing.
Okay.
So yeah, so they IRAW does that. They work with grassroots organizations in each of the countries.
So you guys were there at the conference,
Yeah.
and of course, we want to hear some stories about what happened there. Give us some insiders information.
Sure.
And what was the highlight of the conference, maybe?
Maybe we can talk about the structure of it.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just the structure, and then we can talk about the highlights for sure.
Yeah.
So
it was
we-
in Bangkok.
It
for
was
one.
in Bangkok, first of all, yeah, and it at first there was a 3-day forum just for civil society organizations. So this didn't involve the governments, this didn't involve like the high level officials. It was
Yeah.
civil society coming together to discuss issues. We had workshops to talk about the critical areas of concern and new areas of concern, and it was also a great place to meet people from all over the place because Asia Pacific is pretty huge.
Yeah.
Then after the 3 days, it was the 4 days of the official meeting. So the first 2 days was senior officials, which was I think the more meat and potatoes of the meeting, which
Right.
where they basically just projected the document, the statement that they were going to produce, and they went through each paragraph, each line, and just discussed the language. And then the ministers came for the last 2 days to then clarify that document again and then adopt it. So yeah, so that was 4 days. So that was the structure.
Yeah. Imagine if you were in a class with your classmates and you guys did a document together you submitted as a group assignment. And 20 years later you have to get back
Right.
together and then you have to look at this Word document again. It really is a Word document on the screen.
I think
Okay.
And then
that was definitely one of the highlights was kind of just to realize like, oh my god, the process is very familiar
it's a
because
Word document.
it's a Word document and people are typing in it and like editing it and to see language being edited in real time, but to realize that it's going to affect policies 5 years or like even like a
sure,
year
yes.
from now.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a huge highlight too.
It was like a very big group of track changes all happening
Yes.
at once with different countries making each change. So you can see which countries prioritized what and which
Okay.
countries didn't want to prioritize things.
Yeah.
And when we say civil society organizations before, we mean NGOs.
Yes.
NGOs from Pakistan, NGOs from India, NGOs from Malaysia. Malaysia had a really good, I think, NGO presence at the conference. But the involvement of this is the 3 days for the NGOs are actually to produce their own document.
Yeah, that's right.
So it's kind of like a ghost document alongside the real deal. And this document has all the things that NGOs want, like of different countries. Like, this is all the things you guys should consider. So NGOs working on abortion issues would mention abortion.
Yeah.
NGOs working on violence issues would put in violence in there because it matters
Climate
to their
change,
work.
forced
It would make their work
migration, yeah.
easier if the government saw what they put in and go, yeah, okay, we'll put that in.
Because I mean that's what should happen on all these UN levels, right? The government should be working with all levels of society, which includes NGOs who are working in places that the government sometimes can't get to,
Yes.
or are not paying attention to because of whatever restraints. So yeah, so at the end of the 3 days, there was a statement document that was again culled together from like all these different discussions. There were 480 civil society organization
There were a
members
lot.
there. So
And 3 days.
3 days. So it was a lot of stuff to put together. So at the end, that was also another very unwieldy Word document, and it was just like, whoa. So that was another kind of it was just crazy to see these things happen in real time.
Yeah.
Just to be
Okay.
like, you discuss the issues, you discuss what you want, and then suddenly it's put together into an official document that's going to be given to the government.
governments, yeah. So so then we have this 3-day product from only the NGOs of different countries. We present that to the governments who come in on the day 4, day 5. They're like, okay, now we're here. What do you
Okay.
got for us? And the NGOs like, these are all the changes we want to see. And then the government reads it, and then they take their own 20-year-old document and add in stuff. So if, for example, we noticed things like Indonesia works very closely with their NGOs, and what happens then is the NGOs already tell the governments, these are all the things we want from Indonesia. And an Indonesian government is supposed to represent their people.
Okay.
So if they don't do what the NGOs tell them, you can see the NGOs in the corner going like, why is the government behaving like this?
Also,
Again-
they become pretty vocal.
Yeah, absolutely.
But
And-
only during lunch break.
I mean, you're obviously supposed to kind of follow protocol in terms of what you're allowed to say in the hall, but reactions are immediate. Like the
Yes.
first day of the senior official segment was really charged, and that was just amazing to watch. all these different kind of like, there was clapping, there was kind of noises of
It was
dissent.
like a football game.
Yeah, it was like a football game. It was literally like really, the energy was crazy. So when a government would say something, you could see the reactions of the CSOs
Right.
on the floor. So sometimes you would be like, you know, some CSOs would be like, oh, that's great, you know, they've represented our interests, and other times they're like, I can't believe they said that,
Right.
you know. So it was really interesting to just, you know, and then during the tea breaks, you would see little meetings happening
Yeah.
where the CSOs would meet with their government delegations and have these little really intense discussions.
Why the discussions are important in the government session is that if one country, even if one country
Yes.
doesn't agree with something, for example, 20 years ago maybe there wasn't any cyber violence, of course. They
Yeah.
call it cyber violence, they got internet violence, I'm not sure. Tech violence.
Tech violence, yeah.
That didn't exist 20 years ago. That
of
wasn't
course.
a problem in 1995, but it
very
is
much
now.
is a problem now.
So when you see, let's say Philippines, whatever, suggest putting that in, you now know that that country is committed to creating some sort of change to fix internet
But
violence.
every other country will adopt that as well.
That's
so
the
they have
thing.
to agree.
So let's say they propose. I think it was Philippines that
It was
proposed tech
definitely Philippines, yeah.
violence. And like, can we put tech violence in there as an added list of kinds of violence? And if any other country doesn't like that, then they can't do it. They
because
have to
it's
discuss
a
and discuss.
consensus process. So
Okay.
if one country dissents while the
Disagrees.
other countries agree, then there's an impasse in a way. You have to kind of pause the proceedings,
Okay.
and then that dissenting country needs to meet with the party that proposed it, and then they have to have kind of either outside discussions, or they need to kind of discuss it right there on the floor. So yeah, it's a very fast-moving process because they only have so much time, you know, and it's like to dedicate 4 days is already kind of for governments like a huge amount of time.
Well, what usually happens is that the end product, when you disagree on something, the language becomes weak. As in,
Yeah,
it waters,
it waters
down.
down.
So
Right.
we put in there something really strong, for example, like sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, or SOGI,
Yeah.
which is one of the things we heard a lot. And then, you know, maybe Russia will go like, we don't like that. We don't like the idea of sexual orientation.
Okay.
So we sit down and they
Yeah.
debate, and it waters down to like sexuality.
So that's why the
or
first day
something.
was very bombastic, because you have all this crazy progressive radical language, because you have to start strong, because you know you have to negotiate down.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so
It
to
sounds
see-
very intense.
Yeah, to see the negotiation process, it was very intense actually. Yeah, so it was really, really interesting.
Also, there are 5 countries in the room that will always be in the room.
Yeah, 5
Really?
permanent members
Permanent
of
Of the
the
UN.
Oh.
Yeah.
So you know, France is there, the UK is there, US is there. So you're kind of like part of the Asia Pacific, and you're like, wait, why are the US there?
Why
You're-
is
yeah,
US there?
you're kind of just like, wait, I understand why Australia is here, but yeah. And at a certain point, the three of us were quite confused as to why Russia was there as well. But it makes sense for them to be there, because if Mongolia and China are going to be there, you know. So it was kind of interesting to see what countries spoke, and which, you know, if you're just one of the permanent members, you know, the US and the UK didn't really say very much,
Which
so
is
they were
good. They shouldn't be saying much.
But then, you know, France and the US have stakes in some of the
Countries.
Pacific countries, Pacific
Yes.
islands and stuff. So it's also a very political process. So you
Yes.
start seeing certain things that you only ever read about, and you're just like, and it all happens in one room.
Right.
If I could share one thing that really struck out is that climate change kept popping up a lot this year, because again that didn't exist in 1995, that issue. So a lot of Pacific islands were in the room, and while we're talking about violence against women, they're talking about we're gonna sink.
Yeah.
We might not even
We're
have
gonna
a-
lose our islands.
we
we're
might not
gonna
even
lose our
have a
homes.
country, and a lot of nuclear testing sometimes happens in that area, and you can see suddenly the countries like Japan going, we don't want the word nuclear in there. So you can see all the countries kind of playing with each
Right,
other in a
right,
sense of all the secret politics at stake.
Yeah.
For us, when personally I'm not so familiar with what happens in other countries, so to see certain countries bring certain issues to the front, I realize what really matters
Yeah,
to different
in the
people.
region, and yeah.
Having said that, Malaysia didn't say a word.
Yeah.
Why
Yeah.
not that? Because we didn't have any idea, or just
Oh,
that
okay.
it's
If
not
we're gonna get into
related?
this, if we're gonna get into this. No, it was okay. So we were obviously very, very interested in what our country was gonna say.
Yes.
So we had already engaged with all of our CSO representatives
Of
in the
course.
forum, and obviously we know quite a lot of them when working here.
Yes.
So we've already seen the vocality of Malaysians in the CSO forum. So we go into the senior official segment, and so so the protocol for these things is usually to send a high-level minister, and because there is a hierarchy involved. When you present country statements, when you give talks and stuff, you're ranked. So if you're a minister, you get to speak earlier and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Even the moderator was a prime minister
Yeah.
of an
Okay.
which I can't remember which country.
Tuvalu. Yeah. So for the entire 2 days, we were obviously waiting to see, which issues is Malaysia going to speak on, because our several of our neighbors, I think Cambodia spoke on possibly sex workers' rights,
Yes.
or and so Vietnam said a few things. There were a lot of different ASEAN countries that spoke up, and Malaysia just for the 2 days did not say anything.
Did not say anything.
So, it was very unclear at the end of the meeting as an observer where our country stood and what our commitments were and what our issues were. So we walked away knowing Pacific Islands, climate change, a huge and very impactful issue. Philippines, cyber violence
And
was one of the
political involvement. as a
political involvement.
young women.
Whereas, if you had to make a list for us, like we know a little bit more about what's happening in Malaysia because of our context, but we couldn't tell you what Malaysia was interested in. So, we were introduced to the delegation when we were there, to the
Yes.
official delegation, which does involve government officials as well as would you say a CSO, NCWO, national?
I don't think they are
They're
a
a CSO,
CSO.
but they're also kind of not purely government.
They
like
weren't involved in the CSO process.
So there was a CSO member on there, Shanti from ERA.
Yes.
So there are advisors, so they're trying to make a well-rounded delegation. But the thing is, what we heard from CSO members, what we've heard from discussing with certain people, is that the process seemed quite rushed. There wasn't, Indonesia could meet with their government because they knew who the delegation was going to be
Of course,
beforehand.
it seems like the relationship between the
Yes.
NGOs and the
Yes.
government is pretty close, and that
Yes.
they do listen to all those opinions.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah, and there's space for them to meet. I think most of all, maybe the end result at the actual meeting could have been different, but they actually were like, "Come meet us at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about the documents." So there was a preparation, and you could see the countries that were prepared. They came with the documents. They quoted from actual other UN documents.
Oh, I see.
Whereas I think we heard the CSOs didn't know who the delegation was going to be before we got there. So only when we got there we were like, oh, so it's these people.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think when you're not and just to go back to my point about the protocol being to send ministers, is when you're a higher level official, it's easier for you to have a mandate to act on. So you go there and you're like, okay, I know that this is what my country needs and what my country wants and what I should negotiate on, but if worst comes, if need be, I can negotiate on the fly. I can be like, okay, we can promise this, or we need to take this out. Whereas if you are just you're a mid-level government official, you can't say certain things because you go back kena hentam by your bosses.
Right.
So it's a bit like I guess it's about the capacity that they had as well. I don't think they had the delegation that was sent didn't have the largest capacity to act as freely as some of the other countries.
Even the ministerial delegations who could not make those changes be like, give us a second, we need to phone home.
Yeah.
We're going to double check on that and come back to you. Sometimes there was even a tactic to stall, like Russia, be like, we don't have email.
They actually used that excuse.
It was just to slow things down for everybody.
We've got to wait for word from
But it was
Moscow.
pretty noticeable to see what exactly happened there.
The issue is, I think, what does silence mean as well for us? The fact that Malaysia didn't say anything. In that room, I made a point on this on Twitter. Silence is not the same as silence back home. Silence at home is like, I got nothing to say, so I'm going to keep quiet. But over there, when you're silent, it means you agree. When you're if you don't agree, you have to protest. I don't want that word there.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of progressive language that went through the document. A lot of countries promised, and this is a promise for all countries, not some. All countries promised to work together on sexual orientation rights and all these things.
Comprehensive sexual education,
Violence
equality
against
for
women.
girls, like preventing forced and early child marriages. So these are issues.
Higher political participation.
Rights for migrant workers. So we know.
I'm sure Malaysia has a lot of issues
We
regarding
do.
women like
We
that. I'm
have
surprised
very
to know that
relevant
it was
issues.
very silent
Yeah.
and quiet
But-
about it.
And it's like the thing is,
Those promises were passed.
yeah.
That means we didn't protest those promises, which means that Malaysia makes those promises. We actually promise all those things.
I mean, our presence in the room already meant something.
Yes.
That we are committed
Well, that's
to
for sure,
to
yes.
the Beijing platform. We were there 20 years ago. We're here now. But I think it's also that kind of thing. Like, what is the level of your commitment, and what does your commitment actually mean? And so for us, it's kind of just like after a while, after the first day, we saw a lot of tense moments between maybe there were the progressive states, and there were the more conservative states, and we were kind of just like, after a while, we're like, maybe no news from Malaysia is good news. Like, if you know, would it be worse if they
allow this change?
Would it be worse if they suddenly put up their hand and be like, we agree with Iran, we don't want girls and boys to have equal inheritance to land, and we're gonna be like, oh no, you know? So it's kind of just like, what does silence mean? What does saying something mean? It was
That was what we met. That was the first thing we said when we met them. We were given the opportunity to meet them during break. We're like, thank you for allowing progressive language to go through, because basically now Malaysia has promised for progress in these areas
on a regional level, on a global platform.
They made that promise to like over 50 countries. I just want, for me, as someone on the grassroots level, I would like to see that promise here. I don't see that promise necessarily in newspapers at the moment. It doesn't seem like we talk like we know that we've made this promise.
Do you want to tell us what were some of the promises?
The promises is the entire Beijing platform.
Okay.
When I say platform for action, actually, I guess another way of saying it is a promise. So if you...
It's a commitment.
And it's a public document. If you go on and you Google the Beijing Platform for Action plus 20 and you see and you read that, Malaysia promised that. And Malaysia promised that to the world.
And we're not, I mean, we are signatory to a few UN conventions. So like the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, CEDAW,
Right.
and then the Convention to the Rights of the Child. So it's like there are these conventions that have been agreed on. And, you know, for us, it's like you can't just say you've promised us something and not then fulfill that promise. So as young women advocates, not representing Malaysia, but being from Malaysia, to see the process, we were just kind of like, you know, we want to see what is, when you say something on that level, on this high level, how is it going to trickle down? How is it going to affect the people that we work with, the young women that we know, us, you know, our lives? So because CEDAW has been ratified for a while, and we've
promised CEDAW quite a long time ago as well. And the thing is, you can see Malaysia had a really strong civil society presence, so we had a lot of NGO reps there. The change is definitely happening from the bottom up, but from the top down, we didn't really see what.
So that's one of the issues that
definitely. I think coming straight up, honestly, for me as a young person, I didn't know anything about Beijing, about CEDAW, about CRC. If you asked me about this in the beginning of the year, I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And I think most of my friends honestly would say that. What CEDAW? I'm like, I don't know what CEDAW is. So there's this big gap, I notice, as young people, there's this big gap between what the governments have promised to higher level people around the world and what the government tells us, the people back home.
And also, I think it's the awareness here.
Definitely.
You have to educate people
Absolutely.
and able to make people involved in this movement.
Yeah, because these are our rights as well, you know? So if you're aware that you have a right to something, then you fight for it and you want to protect it as well. So I think a lot of the reason there's apathy or a lack of engagement is because people don't see the point. People don't see the stakes in it.
Yes.
But once you start giving up your rights, you're giving up everything. So for us to know about CEDAW, CRC, Beijing platform is to know, yes, our government has promised things. Our country is meant to be this ideal state that they've kind of put forward, but yet
and
things aren't happening.
We don't live in a bubble.
We don't live in a bubble.
I think as a young person, if you a formerly apathetic young person, I'd be like, there's nothing I can do because everyone's so much more powerful than me. There's no way, like Malaysia's government's at the top and that's it. I can't change anything. But then when I find out,
most of the people do think.
Exactly.
In this country,
but then when you realize we don't actually live in a bubble, Malaysia is just one country in many countries, and all these countries do talk to each other. And they all have issues with each other, and some are friends and some are enemies, but they do agree on moving us forward as a world in a way. And Malaysia is in part of that conversation. So it kind of opened things up for me when I realized actually we do have a boss. The boss is everybody else around the world. We promise all these things, and you know, and you come in like, hey guys, we're friends. Here are all these things we want to do, and I come home and I don't do it.
I mean, one of the more important.
Is there no mechanism to make sure that these promises are kept?
I'm not sure how legally binding this is.
Well, because it's the UN, right? It has to be a very diplomatic process. You can't. You're not a police force. So you know, there are definite methods of ensuring that there's accountability and that countries report, and but also there's no real way to force a country if they don't want to do it. So it has to be meeting halfway. So like, say we haven't submitted our third or fourth report for CEDAW.
Yes, both reports we haven't submitted. We're very late.
We're quite late.
Well,
and
2008.
We're 2008.
2008.
So
That's a long time ago.
Yeah, and like one of the things we've been working on as activists is a sexual harassment bill that was proposed in 1999 or 2001.
About
around that.
years ago.
Yeah, so that's been 13 years. So there's all this time that passes, and it's kind of just like there's if there's no political will on the part of the state or the government, and they're not meeting people halfway, but and there's not maybe serious injuries being done or serious human right violations, there's nobody that's going to step in and be like, you've got to do this, because they're not children. Governments are not children.
Yeah, the paternalistic approach doesn't work. Like, we're saying, okay, is anyone going to hold Malaysia accountable beyond Malaysia, bigger than Malaysia? I'm like, no, we're supposed to do it.
Yeah.
All of us, our rakyat is supposed to go, we know that you promised this. I know you don't think we know, but we know you promised this.
And there are employees, we need to manage them and say, like, what are your quotas? What are your goals?
What are you doing with that tax money?
Yeah.
And the reason, this all comes back to as CSOs and NGOs like ERAW, who goes, okay, we notice there's a gap of knowledge in young people. Young people don't know about these processes. When we went there, very few young people were at Beijing. And they're funding this. Like, we applied to go because we wanted to know what's going on as young people. We're curious.
of course.
And that's is part of our job also, to come back. Part of this is to come back and go, so now we've been there and it's not as weird, as scary as people think it is. The UN building feels a bit like a Hollywood set. But, stuff happens in there that's pretty normal, like editing a Word document. I think a lot of us don't have access to those spaces.
Yeah, it's just such a privilege to be there, to realize that this is not something that people get to do all the time, and for us to have met our government delegation was in itself big, because how many young people can just go up in a room and just be like, hello, like, you're from the government.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
There's and the fact is, once we were out of Malaysia, the access was a bit easier because we were away from all that convention and stuff. So
So,
that's a huge
unfortunately, guys, I'm gonna have to stop you.
No, that's all right.
Thank you so much for coming in and sharing your experiences
no
with us.
problem.
But we'd love to invite you again to talk more and deeper.
There seems so
Yes.
much more
so
that needs
much
to be
to talk
discussed.
about.
Could I make a recommendation to anyone listening?
Sure.
To maybe look up the Beijing Platform for Action.
Yeah,
look up,
there's a Wikipedia page, and UN has all the documents up. So
Look
if
up
you want to spend an
CEDAW.
afternoon,
you can look. In fact, when we signed CEDAW, Malaysia signed CEDAW, we have to report to them, and sign Beijing. I think we do have to report to them. So we can find all these reports online. You can see what the governments are telling, at an international level. And if you're doing any work to create change in terms of gender equality, whether you have a sexual harassment awareness campaign in your university or something, you can use the language in that document. That's what the document is supposed to be for. It's a framework for all of us.
yeah.